thanks for inviting me, and thanks for staying up late or getting up early or whatever. And so thanks for taking the time to come and visit. It is an honor to speak with you. You probably have seen some of my office hours where I film around the world, the latest ones from Hyderabad. One of the first things they say when they see me in office hours is what a nice guy I am for doing office hours. And I tell them that actually I do office hours for a very selfish reason. And that is that once I finish recording the videos and make the quizzes and make the auto graders, you and the teaching assistants tend to get to have all the fun. You enjoy the course, you learn from the course, you get to talk to folks, and I'm off making new courses or teaching on-campus classes. And so I'm a little jealous of the fun that you're having taking Python courses together. And so for me, meeting students like we are doing today refreshes my sort of joy of teaching, right? This is how I meet students and remember why it is that we do all that we do and why it is that we built these things. And so thank you for coming. Don't think of this as like me doing you a favor. Think of this as you giving a gift to me. So I'm really looking forward to our interactions. Later, I'll give you some other comments, but this is a very happy time. Sorry I'm late. I had trouble parking. I should have added a little more extra time to make sure I could park on time, but I've gotten here. So let's give you some basic facts about the course. Somewhere between 1.6 and 2 million students have sort of touched the Python specialization and course since 2014. And about 30% of those students are from the United States of America, which is the largest fraction, and about 20% of those students are from India. So India is the second largest population that's represented in the course. So that really means if you take 20% of 2 million, that means 400,000 students from India have taken one or more of my Python courses, which is really exciting. I haven't sent around the video that I made of the Hyderabad Hyderabad office hours, but I'll put it in the chat room so you can all copy it. I really enjoyed my first trip to India. It's strange that in technology I've got to be as old. I'm very old. I've got to be as old as I am and have never made it to India, with having many dear Indian friends in technology for my entire 40-plus year career. So I'll send you that. My course is pretty much the most popular Python course in the world. And it's not the only Python course in the world. There's lots and lots of Python courses in the world. But I set out from the beginning in this course to come up with something that was the most approachable programming course that I could possibly create. And so my goal was not to create the most rigorous or the most thorough programming course, but instead the course that would appeal to the most people. That's why it's for everybody. And so if you look at everything I do, at least in the MOOC space, it always says for everybody. And I figure as a teacher, my particular unique skill and joy is to try to take materials, whether it be programming, eventually I want to write hardware courses or courses about computer architecture or courses about C or courses about this, but from the perspective of teaching everybody. And by that, I mean, regardless of economic background or an economic situation, regardless of location, regardless of disabilities, everybody means everybody. And I don't know why more teachers don't take this approach, but they don't. And that's perhaps why their Python courses are in 2nd, 3rd, or 55th place on the list of the greatest Python courses in the world, because somehow they've decided they're going to teach a subset, somehow the special subset that is worthy of their class. And as far as I'm concerned, everybody's worthy of learning how to programming. I don't care if you're going to be an artist. I met a woman who got a PhD in Shakespearean literature. who took my class and now she does data mining about Shakespeare, okay? So, I mean, what could be farther from engineering perhaps than Shakespearean literature and a PhD in Shakespearean literature? And that is a joyful kind of example of the for everybody philosophy. It's like for dummies, but dummies is bad. And so they have all these books called like blank for dummies. And I hate that. Nobody's a dummy. They just don't know yet. And so that's where the for everybody comes from. And Python, it's really funny. You may meet me in person and you may say something like, I'm having trouble with this NLTK, Natural Language Toolkit. Could you take a look at my code and tell me what's going on? And I'll say, I don't know anything about NLTK. And they'll be like shocked that I'm like not a Python expert. I am not a Python expert. I don't even use Python in my daily life unless I have a real tiny data problem to solve, right? Like some of you see me make a map or whatever. And I use Python for that and I love Python for that, but I don't work on Python every single day. I program in languages like Java and PHP to build websites. And I chose Python because it seemed like it was the easiest language to learn. Now it turns out in the last 5-8 years, it's very, very valuable for your career. But I literally did not choose it because of its value in the career space. I chose it because I thought I could teach more people with this language than any other language I'd ever seen. My second choice was JavaScript. And you can probably, if you know both Python and JavaScript, you're probably glad that I didn't choose JavaScript as the very first language. I like JavaScript because every browser has it built in, but then you gotta like play with the browser. And turns out they're not, other than building web pages, JavaScript is only moderately useful. And so Python is literally useful for everything, and data is useful. I mean, when I started in 2008, there wasn't this like obsession with data mining. It was just, I picked data as the thing because I thought it would be fun to look at people, right? So we draw graphs of people and compute sums of how averages, but it's all about people. And the data that's in the class is the famous mailbox from 2008 of the open source Sakai project. And that's about people too. And I show you the pictures of the people doing things, doing data analysis on the things that people do, doing simple text analysis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that people who are successful need to honestly acknowledge the lucky aspect of their choices that they make and the things that they do. And so I consider picking Python not because of my brilliance, but instead because of luck. I consider choosing data as the focus of the class, luck, not brilliance. Perhaps the only thing I will take credit for is the fact that I'm only a moderately skilled but very hardworking programmer. There are so many people who are smarter than me and better than me and they can solve harder problems than me. I love programming, but I'm not like even in the top 10 of the programmers I've ever met. There are so many people who are so much smarter than me and I work really hard and I love programming. I think of programming as creative. But one thing that I never forgot, and it's a long time ago, in the fall of 1975, when I first learned how to program, I never forgot how hard it was. I never forgot the moment of going from I don't know programming to I do know programming. Whatever happened in there was difficult, was challenging, was not easy. And so I have empathy for anyone who has problems. And I designed this course specifically for those to avoid hurting students, to avoid making it so painful for students that you would say, you know what, maybe programming is not for me. As far as I'm concerned, if you take my class and you believe that programming is not for you, then I have failed. I, as a teacher, have failed if I've made it too difficult. That means you still have to take more classes after you take my classes before you become an expert programmer, because by no means does my class plan to turn you into an expert, but it plans to make it so you can do basic things and you're not afraid and you're ready to learn the next things that you want to learn. So that's the basic philosophy of the For Everybody. I'd like to think that the auto graders are a pretty clever idea because you can take the first 2 classes by using nothing but a web browser. And I also think, and I'd be curious what you think, that students online have faced way too many multiple choice tests as the only way to earn a grade, which I basically hate multiple choice tests. I only give multiple choice tests to communicate to you what it is that you should have got from my video materials, not to be the grade. That's why you can take them more than once, and they're not high stakes. The multiple choice questions are low stakes. And the actual things that are high stakes, the things that matter, are puzzles, so that you're sitting there. And yeah, I'm sure there's a way to Google what's the answer to 4.6 in Dr. Chuck's class and find something on Stack Overflow. I have actually seen my exact questions from my class put on Stack Overflow so someone can answer them and get points for it and whatever. And you know, if that's happening, I'm not going to cry about that. I'm not going to worry about that. I think that ultimately students in general, and myself when I'm a student, respond far more positively when being faced with an interesting and engaging puzzle, rather than, oh, here's like 10 questions that are really worded very vaguely, just so I get a 7 out of 10 and have to take the dang quiz over. And so multiple choice quizzes, we teachers can diabolically construct multiple choice, sometimes unintentionally diabolically construct multiple choice questions that are really very, very harmful for people's learning, and really sort of say, you know what, you learned, you watched my video, you learned this little chunk about tuples, and now I gave you a quiz and you failed, mostly because my questions were worded badly. And so I'm on this kind of crusade that basically says, down with multiple choice quizzes, or at least down with high consequence multiple choice quizzes. So, and so I'd like to think that I created something that engaged you. Students have teased me that every single time I start a new week's lecture, I say, I'm sorry about how hard that last week was. This week's going to be better, and next week is going to be even better. Don't leave me now. Just don't leave me now. Stay with me. Come on, don't quit. So apparently that is in my mind all the time, that the goal of this course is to keep you engaged and have you not quit. And my job is the old gray-haired dude is to say, please don't quit. Please don't quit. Please don't quit. So then let me talk a little bit about what I understand that you're doing at Monopol that I think is really awesome, and this won't surprise you, those of you who've taken my course. What I really love is the fact that Monopol has decided that this is not necessarily a bunch of for-credit stuff, and I don't know how it works in engineering, but in general, the idea is to go ahead and take whatever education you love, right? You might be an accountant, you might be in hospitality, you might be, you know, as Manisha said, anything, right? So let's just use the term liberal arts. Study something you love. Study something that's going to make you passionate. Study something that when you are good in that field, you are going to feel rewarded, not just like, I'm doing this for money and I hate every minute of it, but it's good money, so I'm going to do it. But increasingly in those fields that do not sound technical by their name and their nature, need technical things, right? And so this is where I love how Coursera can complement a high quality college education, right? They've seen fit to give you access, unlimited access to Coursera courses. You use them to supplement your regular coursework. And regular coursework is not always fun, especially if you're kind of in a major, you know, and you're doing this thing and it's like, whoa, they're just boring me to death with all this detail. Well, that detail will probably hold you in good stead when you get into the marketplace, but they also don't always have time to slap in a Python program. And so this is where I think literally every person who's doing Shakespearean literature should be allowed to take their Shakespearean literature, but they should be required to take Python too. So what they're doing is they're giving you the option here of supplementing the education that you're getting at your university with the kinds of things that are going to really be helpful. And so some of you have taken one class, some of you have taken more than one class. The thing that I would encourage is that you think of your time at university as like a picnic, right? I know we teachers give you lots of assignments and you have to work late and we're not very friendly about deadlines. And that's mostly the reason we do that, is because all those other teachers of your other 4 classes or 3 classes, they're making deadlines too. And if I don't give you a deadline, then you're just not going to do my homework at all. And so you're going to ignore my course. And then we're going to be all frustrated, right? So college, unfortunately, is compressing a lot of learning into a short period of time. And all we teachers in a residential program or an online fast-paced program, we're really kind of fighting against each other for your attention. The beauty of Coursera is that you're taking my class when you have attention, when you have spare attention, when you're perhaps a little more well-rested, and you're in a mode to learn. And in a sense, the Coursera classes that I teach are meeting you halfway. I'm not over-teaching. I'm not giving you 4,000 problems because I have to meet the curriculum committee or whatever. I am teaching the parts that I consider to be essential and joyful, right? I don't ever want a smile to come off your face. I don't want you to frown when you're taking my class. It's okay to struggle because learning is hard, right? But I don't want you to be like, this person is giving me nasty homework just to be nasty, right? We sort of do that on campus sometimes, and there's a place for that because, you know, especially if you're from 18 years old to 24 years old, we got to get your attention some, because it's real easy for an 8 to a 20-year-old to have attention go somewhere else. And so in on-campus programs, we're like, I'm going to teach your attention, and I'm going to give you assignments, and like bang, bang, 2 a week. I mean, and if you're 5 minutes late, I'm going to take 5% off, you know. So we're mean about that. But that's where Coursera is not a replacement for that, because there's no, to me, in a Coursera class, until it comes for credit, like in our new master's degree online, you know, we're going to be giving credit. And so the pacing is going to be very different in that, right? But if you're talking about my MOOC or my specialization, the pacing is in your favor, right? Because I know that you're taking it voluntarily. And then I'll close with, so I'll close to make sure we have 30 minutes for interaction and questions. So make sure we have 30 minutes left. But the strategy I think that you should have, I mean, take as many classes as you can. Think of your access to Coursera as a supplement to an on-campus education, as a picnic, and try everything, right? It's like going to a buffet. The first thing you do in a buffet is grab a little bite of every little thing, and then you decide what thing on the buffet is the tastiest, and then you go back and get more of that. But this is an amazing moment in time where you can supplement a deep exploration of knowledge in your major, and then just have a panoply of other things that you can pick and choose from that can really enhance your value in the job market. And so part of the problem with your major is they teach you things that eventually will be valuable in the job market, but might not be the first day. And Coursera can kind of supplement you with those skills, where you say, you know, I'm a librarian, but I know Python, and they say you're hired, right? And so it turned out that you spent 4 years of your life to be a librarian, and you spent 5 weeks of your spare time to know Python. And so that's the win. You know, that's how it all wins eventually. Okay, and I'll stop there because I want to get to questions. I am looking and have been looking at the chat window. And so let me get to the chat window, and then I don't know, we got a hand raised too. I don't know how to do that. Manishi, do you want to sort of just interrupt me when there's a hand raised and we want to do an audio one?
Absolutely.
Okay.
For people on the call, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat window, or you can also just unmute yourself and ask the question. Dr. Chuck, while we're waiting for some of the questions coming in. Hi, Pratiksha. Did you have a question you wanted to ask?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Okay, you've unmuted yourself.
Sorry.
Dr. Chuck, while we're waiting for questions to come in, well, I had one. Given that, you know, some of us have, you know, taken your course and maybe even other course, which is like, you know, related to programming. Now, what should be, you know, a person who's just taken a basic programming course, what should be the next steps? Like if someone is looking to build a career, what should the career trajectory look like? And even for those, you know, who are pursuing a non-technical degree, I mean, what is the relevance of learning a programming language like Python?
Well, so I would say that the key for me, the key learning objective, unless you're going to be a computer scientist, the key learning objective is actually to master programming, to get to the point where, and you don't master programming after my first 2 classes. What I often tell people is go back and take another beginning class that's taught by one of those other professors that taught in a more rigorous and difficult way, and see if you can handle that. The only way to get better at programming is to do it a lot. And I think the biggest mistake people take is I take like a beginning programming class and I immediately want to take an intermediate or advanced programming class. And then I fail in those intermediate or advanced programming classes. And I'm like, oh, programming's not for me. So what I say is you start at the beginning and do enough beginning classes until you're like, this is boring. I am not taking any more beginning classes. I can walk into a Python class and I can finish a 5-week class in 1 day. And now you're ready, right? Because now that's a sense of like, this is easy. Beginning classes were easy for me. Now I'm going to take an intermediate class. You don't go like, oh, this beginning class was really hard and I had to get a lot of help from people and I learned a lot. Now I'm going to take an intermediate class. That's the worst time to take an intermediate class. So I do think that programming is a skill, and I don't care what language it is. Another thing to do is once you kind of understand Python pretty well, take a different programming language. That's why my web applications for everybody specializations in PHP and JavaScript. And you'll come from my Python class and you'll switch into my web applications and you're like, oh, this is hard. And the answer is that's good, because now you're taking that notion of programming and you're making it really much stronger in your mind. And so I like getting to the point where, and then you can actually sort of go away from, once you've got to the point where the programming is sort of like walking, and you sort of mastered the basics of programming, I think then you can walk away from it, and then you can do your career as a hotel manager or whatever. And then eventually that programming problem sort of shows up as the next thing that the next challenge you have. And then you should have that skill at the ready. It's almost like playing a sport. A lot of people, play soccer when they're very young and play, when they're 18 and they get really good, and they play soccer when they're 18, and then somehow they go off and are a hotel manager. And then 15 years later, they come back and play soccer and they're still awesome, right? I mean, it's like I play soccer every week and you haven't played soccer in 15 years and you're better than me on the first day that you show up. And the answer is, yeah, you got good at soccer when you were 17 and I just kind of played crappy soccer my whole life. And so this is why I think that at the moment that you're learning, you should lean toward mastery of the easy things, because mastery is what sticks with you. Awareness doesn't. You would remember, I could learn programming again, but if you master programming, then it's when it's never leaves you. It's kind of like mastering soccer. When you do that, you never, or cricket, I should use cricket. I love cricket too. If you master cricket when you're young, you can go away from it for a very long time. And then you come back 20 years later and you still are a great cricket player, right? Or a race car driver or whatever. So that's sort of my recommendation is, be broad, but also use that breadth to create mastery, not necessarily of Python, but of programming in general.
Okay, I'm seeing that we're getting a couple of...
Okay, let me go up and get them in somewhat order. I like that very first one from Abhinav, the second-year tech student at MIT Manipal. How do I do an internship under you or at the University of Michigan? This is a very common question. Happy to answer it. So it turns out, it's harder than it looks, right? It's harder than it looks in that it's very rare that a faculty member, including myself, sort of establishes a relationship with somebody like yourself and says, okay, come to United States, come to Michigan, we'll get you into the program and you're gonna work for me. That almost never works. And the reason is that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of students that would want to do that. And there's just no way to figure out who it is. And the same is true for applying for a PhD program. So the way in, and I've mentored a lot of students that have come in and eventually gotten PhDs here at the University of Michigan School of Information. The way in is just apply for a straight up master's degree and come to the United States and take a master's degree and then make friends, right? And I know that seems unfair and that it'd be nice if I would pay you to come to the United States and pay you to go to school, but we just don't know anybody well enough. It happens rarely in PhD programs, but it's hard. And so the key is those kind of things, those kind of things require sort of an in-depth interview. It's no different than an internship at a company, right? So how do I get to work at, you know, some fancy company? The answer is, while you're a junior in college, go do an internship at that company and then meet people. And then they'll say, don't go back to school, come work for us. And you'll say, I'll be back in 9 months when I'm done with school. And then you got a great job because you know people. So the cool thing is, at my school at least, is that it's not all that difficult for a good undergrad from anywhere in the world to get into our master's program. You got to pay, you know, it costs you money or your parents' money or something, but then you get to know people. And if you are truly talented, we are all looking every fall, we look at our incoming master's class and we're like, who are the hot shots in this master's class? But you meet them in class more than like banging on your door and saying, I want to work for you. And then what happens in our program is, because it's a 2-year master's program, you kind of wander around in classes and bump into people in the first year. You might get sort of a research work in the first year. But what happens for the students that I end up being friends with is we have teaching opportunities where we have graduate student instructors and we pay them. And so if you get to know a faculty member, you do really well in their course, and then next fall you're coming back, you're a second-year student, and you can be a teaching assistant and be paid to teach at first-year students. And by then you have been here a year and you like know everything, your culture stuff has changed, you got your living arrangements all figured out, and you're like an expert and you're well known. And so, and then what happens is then toward the end of that master's, if you do a little bit of research, you run into some research active faculty, they go, you know, you ought to apply for a PhD. So one student, for example, who filed this, came from China, got an undergrad, showed up for a master's degree. We became good friends and he became one of my teaching assistants. And then he started doing a little bit after he did teaching assistant, then he started running around with research faculty, and then he got friendly with some research faculty, did good work, and they told him to apply for a PhD. And he did, and he got accepted, but quietly he also applied for a PhD at Carnegie Mellon University, and then they accepted him too because he was awesome. And at that point he was already here. He had a track record of awesomeness, people like me that would write him a really good recommendation letter. And then he goes to Carnegie Mellon University. Why? Because he'd already been to Michigan, and he did 2.5 really great years here, and we loved having him. And we're really proud of the fact that he's now at Carnegie Mellon University. So what I just talked about was a situation where you get here and then you make friends while you're here. Now, honestly, part of the reason of that story that I just told you is he was a super talented and hardworking guy, right? And so you don't just like show up and say, hi, I'm you know, so-and-so, and I want to be your friend. No, he worked his tail off, and he made my life a lot better by knowing him, right? I mean, we worked on all kinds of things. He was really smart. He was a natural programmer. And so the cream still rises to the top, and it's not like you just get here and automatically that story happens to you, because that story only happens to about 5 to 10% of our students. But so that is my answer. I hope that it's helpful. It seems like it'd be nice to just say hi to somebody on LinkedIn and then bang, you're here in the United States, but it tends not to work that way. But the good news is that it's almost more fair, because if you can get here, then you have a chance. And if you're talented, you're gonna show up, and we're gonna notice you when you're here. But it's hard to notice people from far away. Okay. Manoj says, this is an easy question. Manoj says, how is Python used in bioinformatics? I have no idea. I'm not a Python expert. I'm an expert at teaching Python to beginners, right? So you probably know more than I do about that. So that was an easy question. Okay, Raiska says, I was wondering how I should make sure my skills are intact after I've taken the course. I kind of already talked about that, in that beginning course, more beginning courses, and then broaden and try other programming languages. Let's see. Abani. Another question from a person that's smarter than me. I'd like to ask you how to go about machine learning and AI in a step-by-step way, and what are the languages that should focus on for this particular initiative? My question is not extremely short, but pretty short. I don't exactly know. I do know Python is a wonderful start, and I know that NLTK, Natural Language Toolkit, is something that we have in a bunch of our beginning classes. And so Natural Language Toolkit, I think, would be the starting point. The other thing that I would recommend is that machine learning and AI have really become fancy words for advanced statistics. So at some point, statistics isn't so fun to learn as, say, programming, because programming is super fun to learn. But I would say as you're broadening, you know, a little calculus, a lot of statistics, and Python is a good sort of base from which to go after AI and natural language. But you will have to go into other programming languages because ultimately they do things in other languages. And so general programming is, I think, important. Having good skill, mastery of general programming is really important. Okay. Yeah, so management student, hi, Swaroop, hi, I'm a management student majoring in marketing and analytics, want to excel at analyzing customer behavior data to infer preferences and ideologies. Could you suggest a roadmap? So the data mining is a very, very weird field. It'd be nice if we could like teach you one class on data mining, but we can't. I mean, there's no like data mining, because data mining really is, it's like you take a swimming pool and you fill it with data, and then you take you and you push you into the swimming pool, and then you have to swim out, right? And so you might need to know SQL, you might need to know Python, you might need to know Scala, you might need to know JavaScript, you might need to know C++, you might need to know who knows what, right? And so the key is if you're to really be good at data mining, a breadth of technical skills and some calculus, lots of statistics is the best preparation, because ultimately it's not like there's one tool, right? You go to one job and they'll have Amazon Redshift. You go to another job and they'll use Apache Hadoop, and another job they'll use Python and databases, and another job and another job and another job. And then a year later, that job will use a different technology, right? So it's not like I can say, you want to build a mobile application on Apple, learn Swift, right? It's, you know, at least that's the thing that you got, or Objective-C. It's not like that. I mean, I talked to my colleagues who teach data mining, and we're actually working on a curriculum for our data mining online masters that's coming up. And I'm like, I teach some of the beginning classes in that, and I'm like, what skills do you want the students to know? Like, well, Hadoop, do you need to know C? Well, that was last year, we did, but no, we don't do Hadoop anymore. We do Spark now. I'm like, well, okay, do you use, what do you use for data? Do you need some kind of distributed file system? They're like, no, they made that a lot easier. There's kind of like this weird SQL variant. And I'm like, okay, so I just teach them SQL. And they're like, yeah, I just teach them SQL. So what happens in data mining is it's really, at this point in time, it's always changing. So you just learn as much as you can learn, and then dive in to the point where by the time you finish, or by the time you go from like, I'm learning, and then the job, chances are really good that the technologies that you learned are last year's technologies. And that's okay, but you just have to realize that you're kind of like a generalist, but you also need strong skills in each of those things, and then you're gonna need to learn on the job. So that's how data mining works. But the lovely thing about that, so that sounds terrible at some level, because you can't just go to school, then go get a job. That's what accounting is, right? You go to school, learn to be an accountant. Hope I'm not offending any accountants, but you know, you go to school, you learn to be an accountant, and you go be an accountant, and then you retire and, you know, live in a nice house. But in data mining, it's always changing. But the good news is that's why you can get those jobs. Is there's nobody that's been there for 40 years doing data mining, running with Fortran, that says, I know Fortran and you have to know Fortran, and so I'm the only person that can do data mining. It's changing all the time. There's increasing demand for it, and so that's why data mining is a good choice. But understand that it's very much evolving all the time. Samarendra, first year student, want to know only basic logic of algorithms to go about building a career in programming. Samarendra, this is a really good question. I have heard story after story after story of people who took a surprisingly small number of programming classes, like maybe 1 or 2, which is 5 or 10 weeks of programming, and then found 3 years later that programming was the thing they were doing. And the key is that there are many jobs in this world that could be improved by a little bit of programming, mostly data manipulation. So my wife, for example, she works in a job where they have a lot of customer interactions and files that they keep track of. And she doesn't use Python, she doesn't know Python, but she uses Excel, and she's kind of like this Excel wizard. And she comes up with an Excel workflow, and then everyone uses the Excel workflow, and then everyone's working better. So you can say that with Python, right? And I've heard a lot of stories where someone's like, I'm just doing this job that didn't think it needed programming. And now at night we run this report and we get to see where the mistakes were today, or where the customers are that still need help, or, which documents are missing out of this list of documents that we keep in a Google Doc. I download it and run a Python program, and it tells me which things are lit because it's a CSV. And then I write this Python program, and it gives us a real short summary of the things that are missing, which we used to have a person that spent 2 hours after 5 o'clock every day to figure out. And the next thing you know, you write this Python program, and like, you're a miracle worker because you saved us all 2 hours. And then they're like, and then you also have an understanding of programming. So you'll see somebody doing something like, man, that's really, you're wasting a lot of time doing that. Let me see if I can write some, why don't you send me that CSV file or send me that text file? Let me see if I can write some Python program like by tomorrow. And then you do it and they're like, holy crap, it was all day long when I had to do that. And now with you in this Python program, I'll get a little printout that's this big and I can do my job in 15 minutes. So the next thing you know, you feel really good about yourself. And the next thing you know, you switch jobs to a job that sort of is defined as programming. You go from a job that's not defined as programming to a job that's defined as programming. So that's one story. I'll give you another story of a woman I met in New Orleans. And she was really into geographic data. And so in my class, I play with geographic data a lot. And I don't remember what her career was before, but it had nothing to do with programming and nothing to do with geographic data. And so she took my class and started playing with geographic data and played with it more. She started going to meetups about geographic data. And then she started sort of in own initiative going to conferences. Sometimes she would be on panel discussions about geographic data. And she still didn't have a job in geographic data. And at some point, like a year or so into this, she just mentioned to somebody that her real job was like working at a hotel or something. And they're like, you don't work in this field? Really? And you're so dang smart? You're hired, right? And then poof, she made it in. And so the way in is not always, directly, here's a job, need Python programmer. So here's another problem the world has. That if you have a moderate amount of programming experience, right? If you have Objective-C, which is a horrible programming language, is by my dad. If you have Objective-C skill and someone posts a job that says, we need to write Apple mobile applications, you know what you've got. Your skill is very rare. But if you sort of know Python and you know a little bit about data and you're good with people, they don't generally post entry-level jobs that require this. And the reason is, if they posted an entry-level job that required what your skills are, they would literally get 5,000 applicants, right? And the fear is if they post an entry-level job, they'll get 5,000 applicants, and there's literally no way to go through 5,000 applicants or 500 applicants or even 100 applicants. And the one you pick will not be the one you want, right? Because out of 100 applicants, they all kind of sound the same and they all look the same and they all kind of say, I kind of know Python. And then you say you, and that person will be wrong. And so what happens is organizations hesitate to post positions. So how do they find entry-level programmers that are what you're going to be after you take these classes? And the answer is go to meetups. Do anything where people get together about Python. There's Python conferences, Python meetups. Just show up. And then you'll see a job board at the Python conference, right? And what they're saying is that at least if you have the initiative to show up, so that's conference, right? And then you apply and they're like, boom, because you found a back door in that 5,000 other people didn't know about. Or you go to a meetup, right? And you're just like having a cup of coffee or chai with somebody. And they're like, man, we're having so much trouble finding beginning programmers. Now, what I would say is I'd say, well, why don't you just post it? And then they would say, well, we get 5,000 people. So we can't find them because we don't post them. And then you're just happen to be sitting there across the table like, I know some Python. And they're like, why don't we do a Skype interview like this week and just kind of show me some of your stuff in GitHub? You go, like, okay, I'm not an expert, but I kind of know my way around. It's like, oh, that's okay. It's entry-level position. Let's talk on Skype on Wednesday. And then boom, you're in, right? So you have to realize at the beginning, it's surprisingly difficult to get that job. It's surprisingly easy to turn jobs into data jobs, but it's hard to get an entry-level data job. And so So think about finding ways to network with people, get to know people, go to where Python programmers are, and then that's the way to get a job. I've completed, from Anubhav, I've completed 5 really good Coursera specializations. Congratulations. That shows a good level of commitment. I think that's the interesting thing that we do in Coursera is if you have a 5-week commitment where you can do 5 hours a week, we got something for you. But at some point, if you have bigger commitment, and that's what's cool about these master's degrees, online master's degrees, is they really are a commitment, right? Because we're gonna speed you through them a lot faster, which means if you're not really ready to go that fast, you should stick with specializations. But to some degree, you the fact that you've done specializations means, and you've done 5 of them, means that you probably have the time, dedication, and skill level to complete sort of an online master's. And that's kind of our prototype for our online master's in data mining, something or other, what we call it. And so I can tell you about Admission to Us, right? So Admission to Us at the University of Michigan School of Information, we don't use, I think we might still use TOEFL, but we don't use the GMAT or GRE or anything like that. We have this is kind of a University of Michigan wide thing that basically the data has shown that GMAT and GRE correlate only to race and how much money you have. So it pretty much makes it so that if you're a white American, you get in. And so that it really is sort of like legal discrimination, and that's how we perceive it, as legal discrimination. So we have started to reject standardized scores as part of our admission. Now we're pretty hip, you know, and so other schools may not feel the same way, so I can't speak for other schools, but I do know that the School of Information cares quite little about your GRE or your SAT or your ACT, literally. What we care about is the narrative that you write. And in that narrative that you write, we are not looking for you to say, I was the quarterback in high school, and I was the drum major in high school, and I volunteered to help hungry people, and I did this and I did that, and I was a science fair winner when I was in 6th grade, and then in 9th grade I was a science fair winner, and I ran the Latin club, and I'm like, we actually are, when we're reading those things, we're more interested in whether or not we're going to like having you around. And it turns out that sometimes those people who have spent their entire life creating 1,000 lists of things to submit to a place like MIT, they're kind of boring people ultimately because they've spent their whole life trying to produce that list. And so for us, you do need decent grades, right? We also don't necessarily sort by grades, but at some level you have to have good enough grades that we think you'll succeed. But we like the narrative. And you know, just something about, I took 5 Coursera specializations in this, and this, and I really liked learning, and I did well in them, and I feel real confident, and I think I do well in your program. So ultimately, when we're doing admissions, we're most interested in 2 things from your admissions materials. A, will we like you having you around? Will you make our place a more enjoyable place to be? Will you bring perhaps your artistic and musical, and you got to do Python? It's like we could use a few more artists, right? We could use, or you know, maybe you're good at this or maybe you're good at that. And so we really like people that make our community interesting. And will you succeed, right? And so to the extent that we look at grades or other academic achievements, will you succeed? But honestly, I would say that completing 5 Coursera specializations is instantaneous. Yes, you'll succeed in an online master's program. I mean, you've done it. That's a lot of commitment. And so that to me is great. You don't have to overdo it, right? Just how you put it in the chat room. I completed 5 Coursera specializations across business and data science. Other than listing the specializations, you don't have to kind of go into great detail like saying, and here was my 5th week assignment in my blah, blah, blah class. No, you don't have to. We get it. I understand that immediately and understand what it means toward your potential for success in our program. Oh, Cigar Pie. Thank you for your question. That is like the biggest, like, fun question to talk about. Could you give me more insight into open source development? We only have 9 minutes left, not that I have anywhere to go. So open source is basically part of who I am. I was going to mention this in my opening remarks, and so thank you for bringing this up. Open source is the notion of spending some of your life and some of your talent and resources to do things for which you're not going to be directly compensated, and do it in a licensing regime, whether it's like Apache software license or MIT license, and among a group where you're just giving to the common good, right? You're applying your talent to the common good. And then if you think about this in the form of PowerPoint, then there's Creative Commons, right? And so if you look at all my stuff, if it's software, it's Apache license. Then if it's content, it's Creative Commons attribution, not even non-commercial, but Creative Commons. And so if you start seeing my stuff all over the place, and that's with my blessing, right? I mean, I want people to do that. And open source development for me is so joyful in that because we're volunteers, we don't have a manager. We coordinate a little bit, but no one yells at you and says you're late, because you know what? You're a volunteer. And so if I compare the open source project that I work on for learning management systems like Sakai to one of the leading commercial things in the marketplace, which is Canvas, they are a $1 billion organization that loses $200 million a year. I don't know how that works, but they lose $200 million a year. They have tons of employees and tons of salespeople, and they have tons of management, and in many ways, their product is frozen because they've gotten so big and so successful. They don't really like to change it. It's really hard to change it. It's scary for them. They don't know if the product. Compare and contrast that with an equivalent piece of open source software like Sakai. We at any given moment have like 30 people working on it part-time, not just programmers, but like testing people, product manager people, designers, 30 people. At most, we're probably a $2 to $3, $4 million operation per year if you added up all the volunteer work. And we literally produce a product that is on par with billion-dollar corporation products. And you say, like, how can you even do that? And the answer is, our people come to their jobs from a sense of joy, right? We're working on it when we feel joy and we feel great about it. We sometimes have day jobs to pay the bills and take care of our family. But in open source, you can be joyful. And so the other thing that's cool about open source is I wanted to write the article about the people I've known in the last 15 years of the Sakai Learning Management System project. And I wanted to point out what their career position was when they came to Sakai, and then they leave. Some people only stay with us for 4 or 5 years and then they go on to something else. But then I want to show the career position afterwards. And the reason is in open source, everybody has to be a leader. Everybody has to step up, because there just isn't a person whose job it is to do QA. So if no one's doing QA, maybe you'll decide to do QA. And then maybe you'll work really hard for a couple of years. And then maybe when you're done, you get a really great job. And you're like, I hate leaving you guys because, and actually there's a real human being that did this. And she started as like a low-level IT support person before she came to Sakai. She worked her butt off and made our lives wonderful. And then she apologized 3 years later and says, I'm gonna go be an assistant dean and run an online program. And I hate to leave you guys. And I'm like, we're very proud of you, right? We will find a way. There will be a new person that comes in, and then there is a new she that will gain leadership skills and then prepare herself for something else. So open source is a great way to work with people, learn a lot from really smart people. It's not always easy. It's quite challenging, but it's nice to work in a place where joy is the critical element, and personal growth happens. No one is going to say, you know what, I'm going to fight you for the QA lead position because whatever. The answer is, QA is so hard, we need 2 people. We're both QA leads. Let's move on. Let's get going. I'll run the meeting this week and you run the meeting next week, and away you go. Or I'm going to be the documentation lead. So leadership is just something that's beautiful and natural. So, okay, so we've got 4 minutes left. Okay, we're actually making it through the questions. Let's, do we have any sort of Other questions? Anybody's raised their hand? I don't get to see the raising hand part in this, if people got hands raised.
Yeah, we have one. Just the questions in the chat window.
Okay. Okay, well, we only got one more question. This is, I'm an industrial engineer. I would, how good is the research related to industrial engineering topics or mechanical engineering? I'm not very good at that. I have a brother who's a mechanical engineer, and I know that mechanical engineering is an amazing field. My brother would tell you that mechanical engineering is the real engineering, and everything else is not really engineering. And given the talents that my brother has and the kind of weird problems he's solved throughout his career, I would have to agree with his assessment that mechanical engineering is the real engineering. And although now he's a faculty, he's a teacher, and he teaches calculus. So, you know, but there you go. So I think we should probably wrap up unless there's any other questions.
Yeah, I think that's all the questions that we had. If you have any closing comments, that would be great.
Well, I forgot what city Manipal is in.
It's in Manipal.
Okay.
It's in the state of Karnataka in south of India.
Okay, so, oh, right. Oh, I heard that the south of India is like a paradise. It's beautiful and it's green and it's lush and it's like where everybody goes. Because when I was in India a couple weeks ago. So the closing thing is I'm going to be in India for over a week. The first week of December, if you're in my class, you will know about that. We will have student office hours both in Bangalore and in Mumbai. And if you're at IIT Tech Fest, which I think is like 1 million people, I'm giving a keynote, and I'll try to come to IIT Tech Fest. You may or may not know that there is a Indian book publisher that publishes and sells a copy of the textbook in India that's a lot less expensive than buying the textbook. And so we'll probably have a book signing at IIT Tech Fest as well. And then I'll send notes around for that. And so you can come and say hi and get a signed book, but it's like 700 rupees, I think. So it's not like super expensive. We allowed it to be, that's part of the open thing, right? They call me and says, you know, we'd like to print your book in India because it's too expensive for Indian students to buy the book from, to buy a $10 book from Europe and then pays $27 shipping to get it to India. If we just print it in India, we can get the price even lower and the shipping lower. And again, I didn't know this, but like the way you all pay for things and the way you get things delivered, you often use your cell phone to pay for things. And like Amazon Europe doesn't understand these things, but Amazon India does understand these things. And so like, I'm like, sure, I give you send me something to sign and I'll sign it and I will let you sell the book in India. And I don't care really how much money I get, but it turns out I get a little bit of money, you know, and that's how I can buy snacks or something when we do office hours. So I get some money, but for me, it's always more about getting reasonably priced or free educational materials in the hands of the students everywhere on the planet in the best way and the most localized way that it possibly can be. And frankly, not make it about me, but make it more about me drawing attention to good stuff that can then be used in a more localized way.
That's a great note to close on. Thank you, Dr. Chuck, for your time and for very patiently answering all the questions that the students had. Thank you, everyone, for joining in on the call and for asking questions. We will be sharing a recording of this call, so if your friends, colleagues were not able to attend the call, they'll have a recording that they can listen to. Please feel free to submit any questions that you have, via your faculty and management, and we'll make sure that we get them answered. Thank you, Dr. Chuck. Have a good day.
Okay, cheers all.
Thank you, everyone.